on, guys? So I always get asked questions like, hey, how'd you make your mounts? How'd you do the swap? Just a bunch of different questions on forums and Facebook and all that kind of stuff. So I want to take this time to kind of run through the car and show how I did everything. Gonna start off here in the engine bay. Just kind of talk about what this motor is for those who don't know. It is a aluminum 5.3 truck motor. I believe it is a LY6 or LC9, I can't remember. But it was a newer DOD block. So it was, I guess, 2004 and on, I think, is DOD, which is displacement on demand, which essentially means that the engine block was set up so that it would kill cylinders when power wasn't needed for fuel economy. Some random changes here and there throughout the engine block that needed to be done to convert it back to just a regular style with just a regular kind of aftermarket cam, that kind of thing, that were done mostly in the valley cover underneath the intake. All that kind of stuff is different for a higher pressure oiling system, for different valve springs and all that kind of stuff. But overall, it's a pretty stock block. ARP rod bolts, ARP head studs. I believe the main bolts are stock, but it's got a pretty aggressive cam with about a I think it's 212, or it's more than that. It's like 232, 234, something like that. Like a 112 lift. So it's a pretty aggressive cam. But really, other than that, it's just this intake. Some porting was done to the heads. These are 862 heads, original truck heads. So nothing too special there. Just porting. I believe we put LS1 valves in, so larger valves. But otherwise, it's, you know, it's just a little baby 5.3. Nothing too special. It's a cool ass intake. I think it looks cool. Not everybody does, but it's just sheet metal. This thing makes a lot of noise. You can hear the echo. So it's really valve train noisy, just because it's all like echoing through this chamber. It's like a giant hallway. But we've got Siemens Deca 60-pound injectors, feeding this thing all the E85 it can get. So it's got a fuel lab pressure regulator over there. It's running in, regulating the pressure. Oil cooler lines, got kind of a mess of oil cooler lines. For those of you who are kind of new to drifting or don't know about oiling issues that these motors have, we have what is called an AccuSump, which essentially allows us to dump oil into the engine in case of oil slosh. I think you can see it in there. It's that big blue canister. But basically, what it's going to do is it's just going to dump like 3 quarts of oil. You can get different sizes of it into the motor if the oil pressure drops below a certain amount. So, you know, high G forces slosh the oil around and cause oil slosh. You never want to starve your engine with oil, especially when you're drifting, because you're usually in really high RPMs. So to help eliminate potentially blowing up your engine because you starved it of oil, you have an AccuSump plumbed in. So I've got a Y fitting kind of buried down here. It's hard to see right here. That goes from the oil cooler, which is also remote mount. Oil filter, excuse me, remote mount. And then that feeds the oil cooler, which I've got sitting right in there. Hard to see all the coils. Oil cooler goes back out, back into the engine. This was an oil thermostat, but I actually took the thermostat out, so now it's just a free-flowing block. These headers are, I believe, Patriot headers, block huggers. Needed something to clear the steering shaft, because over here it gets real tight. Let's see if I can grab a flashlight real quick. So down in here, you can kind of see the steering's like right on top of the exhaust, and we can see more when we get up underneath the car. But F-body power steering pump, I believe truck alternator, giving me all of those 145 or 160 amps, can't remember. My electric fan that I've got down here, I joke, I say they're like two little mini Ford Taurus fans, which are some of the dopest OEM fans for aftermarket use. But basically this is a Dodge Stratus, so like a V6 3 something liter fan, and these things kick ass. Both these guys kick on when the computer tells it to, and it does work. So over here I've got power steering cooler. Had some issues with going through power steering pumps at my very first event. It's a little oily over here. I think I probably still have a little bit seeping out. Clean that up. But got a bigger power steering cooler, and I really have not had any power steering issues since. But essentially I was overheating the pump, causing some internal bearing failure. Actually snapped the shaft of the pump where the pulley's on, to the point where I could literally grab this pulley and pull it out of the pump. It snapped it off, I guess, at the bearing inside of the pump. That's how hot it was getting. It was seizing everything up, causing some serious issues. I'd be in the middle of a run and then my power steering would go. So yeah, was not good. I got a manual tensioner down there with a ATI dampener. Definitely one of the best LS style dampeners around. Stock water pump, and then you've got a big old Griffin radiator, 3-inch. I don't believe it's double pass. I think it's just a regular single pass, but it's pretty good size. Perfectly fits this fan. Sized them like that on purpose. And otherwise, that's the engine bay. Gonna run down here to my front suspension. Nothing special here, just the QA1 boy totally extended to its freaking max. We're gonna see how this does. I'm probably gonna end up changing these later. I'm sure I don't have the stroke and all that right, and I don't even want to measure it right now. If it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. And I'm pretty sure I already know that I need to go ahead and probably get some coilovers for this thing. But right now these are 1,000 pound springs in the front, I believe. Yeah, thousands. Pretty stiff up there. Stock brakes, stock rotors, a bunch of mud in there. It's pretty sweet. ABS, all that stuff's disabled. Down in here it's really hard to see, but I welded a plate. There's a little Willwood guy up underneath, Willwood master cylinder underneath the brake booster here. And this is actually the reservoir for my clutch pedal. So we'll run around, take a look inside. I'll show you my clutch pedal. So down here, I just got that welded plate. This is a Willwood pedal, single pedal assembly that I've got here, and it's just bolted up to the firewall, and that's how I did my clutch pedal. So up here, here's the fun stuff. Everybody asked me about this thing. What the hell is this? This is a eBay turn signal, because I pulled all this stock stuff out of the dash. Needed to figure out how to do turn signals, hazard lights, so I bought this guy, and it's actually worked pretty great. I need to tighten this, but basically down is left, up is right, and that's a strobe light. Sweet, dope. Down is left, up is right, just like it would be any car. Pull it out, flashers. Works pretty nice. So gutted the original gauge cluster and basically drilled out, cut out the whole thing. Had a black piece of, I think it's like Durlin or something, cut out different holes for all of my gauges, kind of glued them in there, and then wired everything up behind it. I get asked a little bit about this thing. This was originally going to be motor controls for the tilt and extendo steering column. Didn't end up using that, so just kind of scrapped that idea. But just made a nice, kind of nice, it's not super nice, I don't know what I'm saying. stainless steel. It's not. It's mild steel. I just coated it in some hopefully non-rusting epoxy, but I see some rust in there just a little bit. So just kind of drilled out for all the switches and stuff that I want. I've got AccuSump on. It's my top light. Middle light is I believe electric fan is on, and then the bottom light is any check engine lights I get. Then I've got, you know, some USB ports here, because you never know if you're cruising around, need some battery power. And speakers, gotta have speakers. So installing this hydro this week, so hydraulic e-brake, and then I custom made this shifter for our CD09 trans, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But yeah, we got a full roll cage, good old crazy looking X bar back here, just running around. In drifting, in some competition, they require you to have this intrusion bar, which is basically this A-frame that goes to the firewall, just in case anything were to happen where you crash so hard that it starts to get into the passenger area, driver's area. So that's there. So one thing I did forget about is this hub adapter I've got in here that I have machined. So that's a little bright. So I had this adapter made so that I could use a quick release NRG style hub on here. So, you know, you see a little set screw right there. It locks onto the original steering shaft. It's also like a taper fit. And then from there, I just bolted the NRG hub up to it and put that guy on, and it's attached. And then went on eBay also. I was like, hey, what do I have that I can use to do power windows? So I found this power window, it's like kit for like 50 bucks, and basically it did you know, all my windows, just plumbed them up to the electric motors. Did it on all 4 windows, so I was able to keep the existing window motors and windows, and they can be controlled individually at each door. I got some speakers back here, and this is the rear roll cage. I had to gut out all these pans, kind of the floor pan back here, to make a little bit more comfortable seating for these back seats. The whole back is boxed off back here. Per rules, it's the lower mount for the cage. Come back here, I've got battery mounted up, welded to the frame rail. It's held in there. Got a fuel cell back here with a E85 inline pump. This guy right here is a flex fuel sensor, so it can actually, the computer knows what percentage of alcohol is in E85. So, you know, E85 is you know, 85% gasoline, 15% alcohol. There are different percents depending on what pumps you get them from. I don't get it from a barrel, so it's not consistent. But good old Flow Easy filter, just keeping all of the junk out of my injectors right there. So back here on this rear end setup, I've just got my second caliper bracket made up. It just kind of attaches through all these other mount points. I got the QA1 back here with my little adapter down there. Those are also 1000s, so right now we're all square with 1000s all around. Then this upper control arm, which I made so that I could adjust the camber right here at the top of the knuckle. Alright, so starting off down here, power steering cooler, oil cooler. It's basically 2 power steering coolers stacked on top of each other. I welded straight off of the subframe to make these lower kind of supports for this radiator. All this stuff through here, all stock control arms, stock front control arms, stock front sway bar, pretty decent sized. So this oil pan, so I've got a Moroso oil pan. I can put the number in the description for those who are interested. But it is a front sump pan because there was not enough room for me to put the sump back here with the rack, the fittings, and all that kind of stuff being in the way. So it's a front sump pan. Got kind of a little custom dipstick set up here. And then if you look up a little bit farther, you'll see the lovely engine mount I made, which I never painted, with some foopy welds. So basically I've got a bolt that goes up or goes down through the original engine mount, and I welded that to this little flat plate on top, and then I welded over top of that this tube which connects it to the plate that is attached to the motor. So I basically just took a metal plate, drilled out the holes where the corresponding mount holes are on the block, and I took the end of a front coilover from a Lincoln LS. That's what the bolt is going through. And I'll show you real quick what I mean. If you cut this off of the shock, you've got a nice kind of poly bushing for a motor mount. So I just hacked it off here and then welded that in. Welded that into the upright bar that supports the engine block. So I did that on both sides. Harder to see over here with the alternator. And that's how I did it. Come back here, I got this oil pan comes with a little aftermarket oil cooler block. It's attached to the oil pan. Oil lines go up to all that craziness with the AccuSump and all that kind of stuff. So looking at this guy, this is a quote-unquote CD09. I know it says CD8. It's basically, this is a 370Z transmission. So it's the better of the Nissan Z transmissions and Infiniti G35 37s. It is a 6-speed with this big old shiny adapter that bolts it to a back of an LS motor, basically. This is a T56 bell housing that this adapter plate adapts the Nissan transmission T56 GM bell housing to the quote-unquote LS motor. And then back here, this is the original automatic transmission cross mount. And from there, I just took, kind of rolled some extra roll cage tubing, made a flat plate that went across the original mounting spots on the mount, and then made a flat plate that went across the original mounting spots on the transmission, and welded that board together. So that's how that's in there. Then we've got my X pipe right here, coming from both sides of my engine, bank 1, bank 2, to an O2 sensor. My wideband, which is basically measuring my air-fuel ratio. A little muffler here because this thing is crazy loud, because these are the side pipes. This is where it exits out and goes out of the frame rail on the side of the vehicle. Yeah. So people have asked me about this drive shaft, like, hey, how did you get rid of the rubber 3-finger guy? So original diff mount on this side, shiny adapter, regular 4-bolt, more common 1310, 1410, something like that, U-joint flange, just to a drive shaft that was custom made per this length, and it runs down through there. So kind of a pretty simple setup that does the job. Kind of a pretty simple setup that does the job. So looking back here, you see these are all lower reinforcements. All of this for the rear seats. All this was cut out because the shape that it was, like it wasn't deep enough. It was really weird, and it made it really hard to mount a comfortable set of back seats. So I cut all this out, made these tubs for it, and then went and reinforced it with steel cross beams that are welded in here to the frame on both sides. So that's what I did there. Really cool thing that I think is cool about this build that I always wanted to do is I did a bar all the way down the pinch weld on both sides, so I can jack this car up basically anywhere on this pinch weld bar without doing any damage to the pinch weld. I also put plates back here corresponding and attached to that bar that runs down the pinch weld. I got one up front here too, just to make easy jack points. You know, one thing is, you know, even though this isn't like a pit stop sport, it's nice to not have to take all day to jack up your car. So the fact that I can grab it anywhere down the side, or even, you know, when I'm home working on it, I got these perfect 4 mount spots for my lift, and you know, it makes life easier. I don't have to worry about tearing up my pinch welds, you know, in the process. You know, fuel line, feed, return line, brake line, driver's side, rear brake line, passenger side. Got it all tucked up in here pretty nice with a shit ton of zip ties. Stock axle, stock rear end. And that's pretty much all she wrote.